I care so deeply about community. And so my hope is that I could do a little something this evening in the spirit of connection and community within the eating disorders space. And so I'm really glad and I'm really touched that you're here. And like probably all of you, my heart is heavy with what is happening right now in the Middle East. And I just want to start with some acknowledgement that each of you are impacted in various ways by the war in the Middle East. And we, especially as providers, are sitting with a lot right now. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Vicky. She's saying Ukraine in the Middle East. I mean, that's absolutely true. So there is conflict, there is war, there is devastation that is more real now for many of us, and a lot of trauma. And it's a very, very painful time. And I wanted to acknowledge that. And also want to offer my heartfelt support to you as providers. Today I had a day of all clinical supervision and aware of how, as clinicians, it is a lot to sit with a wide variety of people who are impacted differently and who hold varying identities. And it's an awful lot. And I hope that it feels good to be here in some way with one another, even though we're, all in our own spaces. And as I said, so much of what I personally love about my work in eating disorders is connection with other people. It's actually what first drew me to the work, was being able to observe and see what was happening in teams. But I'm also aware that not all of you have had that experience, and not all of you feel a sense of community within this space. And that's one of my primary sort of values that I hold in the realm of eating disorders, and hope and really strive to do all that I can do to create a sense of welcome and openness, and the fact that all of you are needed and wanted here. So I'm going to share my screen. I think that I've kind of said the housekeeping things and shared a little bit from my heart. And I'm going to pull up just a little bit of a very, very, very brief slide. This is a real informal tonight by design. So I'm going to share my screen here. And you can see my desktop here. And I'll just make this big for a moment. And Kathy will let me know if this isn't looking right, if you're looking at my right desktop. So I thought I would share just very, very briefly a little bit about some things that I had wished I had known at the beginning of my career. And then I really want the majority of the time to be spent responding to some of the questions that I've received in advance and that I haven't been able to respond to. And then most importantly, for those of you who are here live tonight, to ask your questions. And I do have a giveaway that's going to happen at the end, where we'll be raffling off an hour coaching call with me, and share a little bit about questions that I get in terms of being able to buy my courses on sale, which my courses are on sale right now. So we'll talk just very briefly about that. Let's stop screen sharing. And let's see. Okay. All right, great. All good. So I'm going to just kick things off by responding to a question that I had received, maybe one or two questions that I've received. So someone asked, on a podcast, I had mentioned that I have a meditation that I use specifically for people with digestive disorders and eating disorders. Oh, that's so nice. Joyce says, your voice is so calm and soothing, rocking baby to sleep, and he's just fallen asleep. That is so sweet, Joyce. Now you've got all kinds of lovely serotonin happening. That's adorable. So I have some meditations that I've created, and one thing I will say is that within my course that I did with Lauren Deer on digestive disorders, I have some different meditations. They're also Lauren did a couple as well. So those are different. I just want to offer some clarification that there are some that are really specific to digestive disorders that are in the course, but the ones that I have for free, maybe I should have left my share screen up. I'll just go right to my website and I'll show you guys how to access it. So you go right here, marcird.com. And then you hover over clinician training, and then you go to resources for clinicians. And I kind of want to do a new one. So if anyone has a request, I would totally take a request. So I have connecting to the wisdom of the body, this what I call a mini-me meditation, and then what are you hungry for? And the meditation that I believe this person is referring to, that I think that I mentioned, is this one, connecting to the wisdom of the body. So that's where I have other free resources here as well that you can peruse. Let me see if I have another sort of quick, easy question. These are the softballs. Someone asks about pricing for my courses, and I will just add, she says, I'm wondering if there's any pricing specials that will be coming out in fall. Yes, my courses are on sale now through November 1st, and you guys will get a coupon code. And I only do it once a year. So it's like strike while the iron is hot, or you can really strategize and know that it'll come around next fall too. So if you want to save some money, you can wait until next fall as well. So let's go ahead and let me kind of look here. Yay, wonderful. Okay, let me start with Taylor's question. Taylor, I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for asking this question. Taylor asks, have you thought about leaving the field? If so, what kept you going, brought you back, and why? And when is it, or might it be time to walk away? So, I will say I personally have never thought seriously about leaving the field, and this is probably for a lot of reasons. I do sometimes, when I'm feeling very tired and a little bit burnt out and or angry, I do fantasize. I sort of move into my fantasy of opening up an independent bookstore next to my good friend Liz Fayram, who fantasizes about opening up a plant store. And so sometimes I float into my fantasy when I feel like I'm having a hard time. So I think, and this will speak to the three things. Oh, I guess I skipped over that, Kathy, didn't I? The three things to share. Maybe I'll do that quickly. The three things that I will offer to you that I wished I would have known. So Taylor, this is a great segue, reminding me to do the things I said I was going to do. Good thing this is low key, friends. So I made a couple notes for myself. So the second point that I was going to bring up is that doing full-time, just straight eating disorders work is really not for everyone. And I think that's for a lot of reasons. so this isn't comprehensive, but one of the reasons is that it's really challenging work. There are some real significant barriers and systemic challenges within the profession. And there are also just challenges of working with eating disorders. You're working with really complex illnesses. And if you're working in areas that are under resourced, or you're not getting compensated well, maybe you work at a higher level of care and they're not paying you well. It's very stressful work. If you don't have great teams and collaborators, if you're not able to access clinical supervision. So it can be wise to think about not necessarily feeling that in order for it to count, you need to be doing it full time. There's really something to be said for doing the work part time and maybe doing some other work that you enjoy, but is perhaps less taxing. So that was sort of one of the points that I wanted to mention in terms of what I wish I knew, is that full-time individual work in particular is really challenging. And I think one of the things that has sustained me in the field is that there was a period of time when I had a high volume practice and I did it all day, every day. But for most of my career, I've been able to do other things like teaching, like I have an adjunct position, a couple of different adjunct positions, creating online courses, clinical supervision, things like that, where it's not just the straight clinical work. And so I think that tailor for me has been sustaining. But I think that while I couldn't necessarily guide anyone specifically on when to walk away, but that I really honor that this work isn't for everyone all of the time, and that there is also the possibility of stepping away and re-entering. And that I think one of the things that we need a lot more of in this space is not just clinical supervision, but is also community and communal support, because it is such challenging work. The other, maybe I'll share the other two things that I was kind of had on my mind that I wished I had known. And I could make a list of like 100 things that I had wished I had known. So it was really hard to narrow it down to 3. The first thing that I noted down that I wanted to share is that for me, I wish I would have known that to kind of be in this professional space and to kind of stay with it, that I would need to develop my own skills of being able to speak up, use my voice, and get much more comfortable with conflict. I was raised in a culture that was very conflict avoidant. And so by nature, I tend to be quite conflict avoidant. But conflict and having differences of opinion is very healthy and very important, and something that has really required us to have a willingness to move into and ease both navigating challenges with our clients, but also navigating difficulties across treatment teams. So that's huge. The last thing that I wanted to offer in terms of what I wished I had known, and everybody who attends, I'm going to have a worksheet for you where I've summarized these 3 things that I'm offering some prompts for a little bit of self-reflection, is that to work in eating disorders, particularly as a nutrition professional, because this is so antithetical to how dietetics education is that it really requires that we do alongside our clients our own work. And I'm not just talking about relationship to food and relationship to body, but also sort of understanding our own story, our own lived experience, the identities that we hold, our own relationship to emotions, and having a toolbox of things that we can turn to help us manage and regulate our own emotions, and a place to be able to process. And so it's actually one of the things that I love the most about working in this profession, is that I feel that my clients and my colleagues have helped me to become a far better version of myself than I ever would have been had I chosen a different career, because it's required so much of my own inner work. And I just really did not get that when I started out. So those are my 3. And I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the Q&A. Vicky has a question. When will you be opening more clinical supervision spots? The genuine answer, Vicky, is that I don't know. I am in the middle of a very, very, very big project that I'm not ready to share about yet, but definitely the time horizon is probably not within 20, we'd be looking at probably 2025. So I apologize. Ambreen, and I apologize, Ambreen, if I'm saying your name wrong. It's a beautiful name. How to start a conversation with a client. Add in, what is the first thing you say to them, and how do you address their eating disorder? So it's easier for me because I only do eating disorders, and everybody works with me where it's a known thing. And so, when I start the conversation, a general question that I always ask is, well, there's a lot of things I ask in the beginning and or might say to kind of help put them at ease, but I might say, tell me a little bit about what brings you here to talk with me today about your relationship to food and body. If it was somebody where I maybe had the sense that there might be an eating disorder, but it hasn't been broached, I might say something more general, like I just said, like, tell me a little bit about how you understand your relationship to food and body. What aspects feel positive? What aspects feel problematic? I don't want to get too caught up in labels, but do you identify with having a problematic relationship to food, a disordered relationship to food? Does anybody in your family have a history of an eating disorder? So those are different kinds of questions that I might ask. I hope that gives you some ideas. Laura's got a great question about marketing. She says, what do you suggest for building patient caseload when you are just starting out? I know exactly what this is like because there was a time when I was starting out from absolute zero. And so the first referral I got actually was on a listserv that I was on, and somebody was referring a client from California to Massachusetts. And I said, oh, I have openings. It's like, well, I have an entire practice and I literally don't have another patient. And then what built my caseload from there were two things. One, I happened to, well, let me back up. One of the things that ended up happening is that I had an amazing therapist that was the therapist of that first patient. And she and I had a wonderful collaboration. So my marketing was my work, truly. It wasn't like writing a letter or, asking a colleague to coffee. And those are great strategies. I've done that too. But truly it was doing the work. And in the collaboration, the therapist was like, oh, wow. She was getting a sense of all of the things that Marci is doing. And I had a great relationship with the client, fortunately. That lent itself to the therapist then referring more clients to me. So I always tell nutrition professionals that the most effective way to market yourself is to do fantastic work, like to do excellent work. And I don't mean in a perfectionistic way, because you can do fantastic work and be perfectly human and imperfect about it. It's one of these things that this therapist taught me in our collaboration. That doesn't mean you are perfect at it. It doesn't mean that you hold yourself to an unreasonable standard, but you are getting training, you're getting supervision, and you're collaborating. You are communicating to other members on the treatment team, even if they're doing a crap job at communicating back. You're demonstrating your value in your collaboration and communication. And so that is truly my number one, is to first focus on doing really, really good work. And then the other, now that we are not in the middle of a pandemic, I was just talking about this with a supervisee today. So this is my opinion. And with anything that is my opinion, you can totally chuck it. You can say, I disagree, or this doesn't work for me. Is forming relationships in your community. And forming relationships in your community, whether it's like a geographical community or a virtual community, does require showing up. And so that might be if there's a networking event, or if there's a conference in your backyard, or if you're attending a virtual conference. Like, there is something that is very necessary about receiving referrals where your presence matters, because people refer to people. They refer to people that they have a sense of, that they think that they might be able to trust. They don't refer to a name, right? Like, think about if a client is needing a therapist, you're not going to say, okay, well, I scrolled through Psychology Today and this one looks good, right? You're going to refer to a therapist who you have a sense of. And so, whatever way that you feel that you can manage that, depending on your resources, depending on your bandwidth, depending on your temperament. I'm naturally very extroverted, so this is something that came more naturally to me. But the development of relationships of those other team players is your marketing is essential. And sometimes that can be really hard. It can feel hard to kind of get your foot in the door. And I am also a big fan. If you are new, let people know that you're new. There's no shame in saying this is a new private practice. I think sometimes people feel like almost like an embarrassment around it. Everybody's brand new in their private practice. And so reaching out to people via email. You can send an old-fashioned letter, that works too, but also in an email, and not being shy and being like, hey, this is me. I am new to the area. I am new to opening up a private practice. This is a little bit about me. If you want to have a chat, would love to find a time and connect. I did something, looking back, I like kind of can't believe I did it, but I attended a networking event, and I had at that time, I think 2 people in my practice. And to my surprise, at this networking event, everybody was asked to stand up and speak into a microphone and introduce themselves. And I was so nervous. And I introduced myself. My name is Marci Evans, and I specialize in eating disorders. I had specialized in eating disorders for all of a hot second at that point. And I have my practice in Harvard Square. All of those things were true. I was a little anxious and uncomfortable, but it goes back to that point number 1 that I mentioned in terms of speaking up and not hiding, because you're offering something that people are wanting. And I wonder how much Kathy is giggling in the background right now, because Kathy is my marketing director and coaches me on marketing all that time. Kathy, are you giggling right now?
Maybe just a little. But you know what? I have to tell you, it's point on advice, especially for starting out. And the one thing I would just add to your sending, a mail or an email, whatever you can do when you're reaching out to people like that for that referral, networking, and marketing, try to make yourself stand out somehow. And that can be really awesome. I have one person in my program, and she does art. So she takes pictures she does, turns them into cards and postcards, and uses that. And it's her own art that she's drawn or painted.
Oh my goodness.
And
Yeah,
it's just
that
an
would not be
awesome way.
that would
Yep.
not be my approach. That is beautiful.
But it makes people remember her. So whatever you
Yeah.
can do to be memorable with that kind of referral marketing and networking, it really will make you stand out from the crowd.
Well, and that you want people to know you. One of the decisions I made, and I felt sort of funny about it when I did it. It was like a little bit uncomfortable for me. I had a bunch of business cards redone and printed up, and I decided to have my image. And I was like, oh, this feels like so weird. And I'm like putting my picture out there, and I've had all sorts of feelings about sort of my imagery being places and pictures of myself. But I realized it was like, I want people to feel I'm not doing it to just get my picture out there for the sake of it being out there. I want people to feel like a sense of connection to me, because it really is in the relationship. And it's one of the reasons why I love doing this work is it is such relational work. Like, the work is so about the relationship with colleagues, the relationship with our clients. You're getting a shout out from Brittany, Kathy. Okay, so I'm glad, Laura, thank you, that you're saying, yes, this feels helpful. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to do like lightning round. Okay, someone is saying, I will start working in the eating disorder space as a dietitian this year. I get stuck with knowing what questions to ask. I understand that questions help unlock profound insights within clients that is more powerful than us telling them. Do you have a mental list of good questions you have developed based on different concepts? How should I go about becoming someone who can ask the right questions? Oh, you're already doing it. You're already doing it. And the fact that you know already as a dietitian that asking rather than telling is more powerful, I want you to know you're leaps and bounds ahead. Like you're like already leaps and bounds ahead. And something that I will offer to reassure you is that this will get easier with time. And it's one of those things where you do it, and as you do it, it will start to make more sense. The other thing that I will also offer to you, that is, I'm not going to say this over and over and over tonight. So I'm going to try to limit the number of times I say this, is that in clinical supervision, your supervisor will help you with that, because it's not something necessarily that you'll just kind of know automatically, and you're already understanding that. And so your supervisor and supervision will help kind of guide you, and they will model it for you. The other thing that I will say to you, and then I'll give you a couple of examples, is that when you come from a place of genuine curiosity in wanting to understand your client's experience, as opposed to feeling like in my clinical assessment, there are check boxes I have to check, or that even the pressure of getting it right, that, and again, this really gets better with time. It's so normal to feel clunky in the beginning. So I just want to reassure you of that, that when you're able to really be curious, the questions will come really naturally. And when I started out in private practice, I had my clinical assessment in front of me. I had my list of questions. So if you've done a training with me, you'll get my clinical assessment and you can just copy my questions and you can go through it in a way that maybe is a little bit more mechanical. It's also why I recommend, and this is what I do with my students, practicing. So if you have a friend you can practice with, or a partner or another colleague, even though it can feel kind of silly, that you get used to the words and the language. Now, let me think a little bit on my toes. What are some questions? So if there is something with digestive disorders and eating disorders, a question that I love to ask is, how do you understand the interplay between your eating disorder and the symptoms you're having in your digestion? Like, how do you understand how the two impact one another? And our clients are a treasure trove of wisdom, and so they'll have all sorts of information. When it relates to body image, a question that is really important for a nutrition professional to ask is, how do you see your body image impacting your relationship to food? How does it impact the ways that your eating disorder behaviors persist? Another sort of general broad question that I ask often in the beginning when I'm getting to know someone is that I'll say something like, what about your relationship to food do you feel, or to exercise, do you feel is really important for me to understand? I even ask, like, if someone's giving me their history and I'm reflecting back what I'm hearing, a lot of times I'll say, do you feel that I'm really getting it? Do you feel that I'm really understanding what you're sharing with me? Because what happens, and this is interesting, you can look into Dan Siegel's work because it speaks to what happens neurobiologically, is that when we share, it's not in the sharing, just the sharing, where the healing happens. It's the sharing and feeling really gotten in a non-judgmental, caring way by another person. And that's being reflected back to you. That's what rewires the brain. And so when we come from a genuine place, rather than in the beginning, we feel sort of anxious and am I doing the job? And sort of, did I ask all the right questions? But when we sort of settle into an open-heartedness and a genuine leaning in and wondering and wanting to know, that's what's felt. And that's what shifts the relationship and where you'll get the richness in responses. I love this question. You can tell how much time I've spent on it, that I love this question. I love that you're asking this question. So keep asking questions. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Okay, I'm going to go with Kayla's question. I'm certain that I'm missing so many excellent questions. Kayla's saying, I recently started working as a college level dietitian. Students with eating disorders and disordered eating are common at campus. In addition to offering one-on-one counseling to those who seek out my free of charge services, are those who are referred to me from counselors on campus. Do you have any suggestions of what I can do as a preventative measure with this population to help prevent students from developing an eating disorders or disordered eating while on campus? So this is a great question, Kayla, and I want to be really respectful of your bandwidth. Like there are only so many hours in the day. But one of the things that could be advertised if you have the bandwidth for would be for that service, not necessarily I'm here to help you prevent an eating disorder, but it could be like supporting a healthy relationship with food while at college. I think that there is something through especially like college health services and mental health services. I think an event, honestly, that could be done alongside your mental health counterparts could be really, really cool. So sort of like, a free to attend and using perhaps I'm trying to think, we just had Weight Stigma Awareness Week, which would have been a really good opportunity, but maybe even thinking about sort of timing ahead of time, sort of more towards the beginning of the semester. And also, frankly, really targeting freshmen. The freshman transition, as probably many of us have lived through it, is really hard and really stressful. And even thinking about sort of coordinating efforts with when sort of the freshmen are new to campus and they're going through orientation and all of that, and thinking how you could build in some offerings in that time, I think would be huge. So I'm going to keep going. Ooh, okay. Okay. Great question. Sarah is asking, how do you recommend handling where mom is terrified of her teenage daughter with anorexia gaining weight? So a couple of things come to mind would be doing a session with mom, maybe a one-off, where and you would be working alongside the psychotherapist to make sure that mom has space to really get out her fears. That we're going to be wanting to offer some guidance and some boundaries around how the anxiety and the terror is manifesting within the family and at home and in relationship to the daughter. So that would be thought through with the psychotherapist, how you navigate that. But one of the things that I encourage my supervisees to think about when they're sitting with a parent who's having high anxiety and terror about anything is having space individually without their child present where someone says, I don't agree with this, or I'm really afraid of this. And I say, tell me about what you're afraid of. Well, I'm really afraid of my daughter gaining weight. Tell me about what about that makes you terrified. Well, I'm worried that if she gains weight, she'll gain too much weight and she'll be bullied like I was at school. Tell me more about your fears of your daughter being bullied. And you stay with it and stay with it and stay with it and say, is that everything you feel afraid about? And then you'll do your motivational interviewing and saying, if it's okay with you, I want to reflect back to you what I just heard, because I want to make sure you feel that I've really gotten it, that you're terrified your daughter's going to gain weight. You're terrified she's going to gain too much weight. And you're terrified that if she gains too much weight, she's going to get bullied. Did I get it all? And then she'll likely say, oh, but I'm also afraid of this. And I'm also afraid of this. Okay. You're also afraid of this. You're also afraid of this. And that you're giving them the space to get it out. And then you will focus on maybe the one or two in terms of how to help her manage her anxiety, and really saying, I want you, this is so stressful, and it makes sense that you're stressful, and you were such a loving and caring parent, and your worries, I can really understand what your worries are, and I hear you. And I know that you don't want to add worries to your daughter's already high level of worry because you care about her so much. And so I want to help you with those worries, but it also sounds like to me, you need support with your worries. You need support with your terror. And it's so important that we make sure you have enough support so that you can be really steady for your daughter. So you're leading from a thing that we know about the vast majority of parents, which is that they love their child fiercely and they're operating from a place of anxiety out of an effort to be protective. And so we want to lean on their strengths and then bolster those strengths while also helping address some of those anxieties and getting some more support on board. So if a parent is terrified in capital letters, they likely need some more support. So that's what comes to mind. Okay, I'm going to go to Melissa's question. How often do you refer clients out to clinicians who have similar lived experiences as the client? I'm thinking specifically about my clients who are in fat bodies. I use a gentle, intuitive eating approach. I love helping clients bash diet culture without blaming themselves for falling victim to it. However, I occasionally find it challenging in guiding them, as it can truly be quite daunting for individuals in larger bodies to navigate daily life, and I want to avoid any sense of confrontation in our conversations. And so I think a little bit, and Melissa, you'll offer a correction if I'm getting it wrong, that perhaps if we don't have the same shared experience, right? So I'm someone who's always lived within privilege. And so might there be some conundrums of my supporting someone in a larger body, having lived experiences that I haven't had? And might it be more helpful for them to have that shared identity? I personally believe that my clients have a sense of what's best for them. And so I will ask that question of my client. So for instance, I have a long-term client of mine who identifies as super fat. She and I worked together for many years. And periodically I have said, you know, I care about you immensely. I will work with you as long as you feel like you need my support. I'm not going anywhere. Do you think in ways you would benefit from seeing a provider who is also fat? And then she lets me know in this particular instance that she actually feels freed up to talk about her own internalized fat phobia because she's not worried about the way it might be landing for me. And so in this instance, she continues to let me know, but I continue to check in with her. And so anytime I'm making a referral or a question, I propose it as a question, and really in an open, non-defensive way. What would be the upsides? What would be the downsides? How would it feel for you to see a clinician of color? How would it feel for you to see a clinician who is also gender nonconforming? One of the things I think that we have to hold in mind, so I confront this in the Boston area, is that I have a limited referral base, and this is sort of speaking to larger issues within our eating disorders profession, of referral options. So for instance, in my Boston area, there are a small handful of dietitians of color. So if a client is really wanting to work with a Black dietitian, well, I'm aware of one Black eating disorders dietitian, and she's an hour away from where I'm at in the Boston area, right? So we also sometimes struggle with having resources to be able to provide to clients even when they do want them and request them. So we run into some real challenges. But I hope that's helpful in terms of how I bring it up, that if I don't necessarily, when I'm making a referral, it's always as part of a conversation and a dialogue with my clients, really trusting their own instincts and what might make sense for them. Gabby's wondering, do I feel that the need for dietitians specializing in eating disorders is growing? I believe that the need is growing, and I believe that it is growing. I think that I feel so much conflict about social media, but this younger generation of students there is so much more that is being openly discussed on social media that I feel like there's more of a conversation. And one of the things that I love as somebody who works within a university setting is that students are making the request of the programs. And if there are students on the call, I don't know if there are, that's what I would be encouraging them to do, is that your voice is what they respond to, and they want to fill their programs, and they fill their programs in response to what they feel like the demand is. And so I have hopes that things are shifting, but we don't just need dietitians who specialize, we need strong dietitians who specialize. And one of the biggest challenges is that there isn't training within dietetic curriculum. So we finish our internships and we might get hired into a treatment center, but because we're undertrained and then often under-supported from a supervisory standpoint, we're then operating below our capacity. So really what we want is dietitians who aren't just self-specializing like I did, but we're shifting the landscape within dietetics education such that there's training happening long before someone enters their first job. Let's see. How did you know you were ready to start offering clinical supervision? Great question. I'm less than 5 years into my work as an eating disorder dietitian and still learning so much, but would love to offer this one day myself. How much experience do you feel it's important to have before officially offering this? Gina, I'm going to be honest with you. I started providing clinical supervision to dietitians that I hired way too early in my career. I think I did, I don't think that I did a lot of harm. But I did not have the skill and the training that I ought to have had when I started doing it. So you at least have the self-awareness that I didn't have when I started providing clinical supervision. So one thing that we're talking so much more in this eating disorder space of getting clinical supervision, which is great. And then this sort of layer above that is getting supervision of our supervision, which I get clinical supervision of the supervision I give my supervisors. So everybody's like mind is like, oh, it's late. What are you saying? So that might be a place to start, is talking a little bit about that one-on-one with a supervisor, because there is something about number of years accrued that does not necessarily translate across the board in terms of a person's capacity and readiness, because what can happen within 3 years versus 5 years versus 8 years? You want to have an abundance of experience to draw from, so that when your supervisees are bringing you something, you've most of the time handled something like that in your own experience as a clinician, rather than them bringing something and you're going, oh gosh, I never saw that, or I've never experienced that, or I've never heard of that. That will happen, of course, but that would be the minority of the time. The majority of the time, you have a lot of familiarity. You've gotten a ton of supervision yourself. And that what I wish I would have done, and that what I would encourage people to do, is to do a little bit of reading that's, a little bit more academic, but getting some good books on clinical supervision and doing some reading of it to understand there's different frameworks and there's different skill sets to being a supervisor. So one of the things that I didn't understand early on is that providing counseling to a client is different than supervising a clinician. You use some of the same tools and skills, but as a supervisor, you're providing a lot more feedback. You're providing more critique, whereas that's different than being a counselor, right? So there's definitely some learning edges. And I think that the learning edges will become more clear as you delve a little bit more into learning about what is supervision. And there are some very good books on supervision. There is a book called, and we can send this out. Patty, if you'll make a note in my follow-up email to everybody, will you make a note for me to provide supervision resources? Yes, I'll stop there. And there was another question that I may or may not get to tonight. So Patty, just make a note and just say Marci published articles that were requested, and I'll include that as well. This is an interesting question. Do you think that a nutritionist needs to have a master's degree from a university to be well prepared for working with people that have an eating disorder? And if so, which university do you recommend? This is such a sort of like hot topic, because right here in the United States, CDR is getting ready to require that dietitians get a master's degree. I do not think that a person must have a master's degree in order to be qualified to do this work, because the vast majority of master's programs don't teach you how to do eating disorders work. What teaches you how to do eating disorders work is to get training in counseling strategy, to get training on the medical aspects of eating disorders, to get training on medical nutrition therapy for eating disorders. And so like I was self-taught for years and years and years. I got my master's degree at Northeastern in Boston, and I did a dual master's, one in business entrepreneurship and eating disorder specialization. And the eating disorders courses did not prepare me to work with eating disorders. Didn't. That particular coursework at that time, it's a very long time ago, did not make me more. Now, the business plan I developed helped me with opening up my private practice. But in terms of actually doing the counseling, no. So do I think that having a master's degree is valuable? I think it can be. One of the things that is challenging to the role of the nutrition professional is that we are on a treatment team, often have the least amount of higher education. So you might have a master's level social worker or a PhD, a psychologist, MD. And so often we're feeling like sort of on the lowest rung of the treatment team ladder for all sorts of complicated reasons that I feel really strongly about. And I won't go on a soapbox tonight. So having additional academic training can help with sort of the confidence and sort of, having those letters next to your name, which is problematic for all sorts of reasons. And if you choose based on what you really want to develop, as opposed to getting a master's degree in nutritional science, which will in no way prepare you for counseling people with an eating disorder, then yeah, it can be a really great asset. I don't have any programs sort of off the top of my mind where I'm saying, go to this program or go to this program. There are a couple who offer some specialization in eating disorders. I teach a graduate level course at Simmons University in Boston, although I wouldn't say pay the money, move to Boston and, get a master's degree at Simmons just to teach my class. But I don't have a university in my mind where I'm like, go to this university, but there may be other people here who who might. Emily's wondering, do you have experience at higher levels of care? I primarily work at PHP, IOP level. Ooh, there we go. Level and occasionally take on outpatient clients. I have found that clients who have reached outpatient suddenly have a lot less to talk about with a dietitian, have a lot harder time identifying ongoing goals. That is a genuine jaw drop, Emily. It often feels like I'm pulling teeth, especially with teens and adolescents. Check. Yes, absolutely. Teens and adolescents don't want to be talking to us. How do you keep the conversation going when someone is out of the danger zone? So that's interesting. I have worked at PHP, IOP, outpatient. I've never worked residential. I've never worked inpatient. It is a regret of my career that I did not do those things, but thus I did not have that experience. I worked at PHP and lower. And it's interesting because I actually find that once a client is more stable and less symptomatic, that's really when the work begins. That's like the down. I mean, that's why I love being an outpatient provider, is that's where we can really get into the depth and the roots, and that's sort of the later stage healing and building that self-trust, building that interoceptive awareness, building that attunement, building that voice, building that all of those things. And so it's different with teens and adolescents because they're in a different place developmentally, and they're usually pretty interested in maintaining their eating disorder. And so it's different because they're at a place where they are trying to get out of our offices as soon as possible. And so that's just pretty typical for teens and adolescents. And so getting clear on your role, getting clear on the treatment frame, thinking about possibly even shortening the length of time of the session, especially if they're younger, because it doesn't make sense for a 13-year-old. Most 13-year-olds aren't going to want to sit and talk for 50 minutes about their relationship to food, right? So I'm probably not adequately addressing your question, Emily, but working with young adults and adults, that's where the richness happens. That's where we're moving on from talking about what's is peanut butter a protein or a fat? You're like out of those kinds of questions. Okay, this is a fun question. I'm aware of the time. Kathy's probably like, Marci, when are you going to shut up? Let's see. Okay. Oh, and Terry's got a really good question. Okay. I'm going to do two more and then I'm going to hit pause and then we will do the drawing. I want to honor everybody's hour. And then what I will do is I'll go for another maybe 10-ish minutes, because one of my biggest professional challenges is when I get really excited, holding the time boundary. You can ask all of my supervisees and clients about that, like ending right at the 50-minute mark. It's just like so hard for me to do. Okay, Kathy, Patty, let's hit pause. Patty, you were trying to text me an hour ago. Okay. Patty, can you draw the winner for the coaching call and text it to me?
Marci, that'll take her a minute. So why don't you do one quick question? Oh, she's got it already. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Carly Abrams. I hope you want to spend an hour with me, Carly. If you don't want to spend an hour with me, you can let me know and I'll find someone who might. I'm just teasing. So Carly, should she send an email to admin at MarciRD? Kathy, is that how we're doing it?
Yes, I'm just posting in the chat. She can email Patty at admin@marcird.com. We probably have your email, Carly, but we always like to double check and make sure.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to move my little Q&A here. I'm going to share my screen one more time. And for those of you who are like, I gotta jet out here. If you want, they can see my screen, right? Yeah, participants can now
Yes,
see
we
my
can.
screen. Okay, perfect. You'll see this on social media. Now is the time. If you've been thinking about buying a course, now is the time because it's 20% off. I will say I do equity pricing all year round. So if you are somebody who identifies as holding an identity from a group that has historically been underrepresented and marginalized, particularly within the eating disorder space, no questions asked. You send an email to admin@marci.rd and say, I'm looking to buy this course and tell me about equity pricing. So here's the coupon code MarciRD23. Okay. So for those of you who are like, hours enough for me, thank you for being here. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to go for another 10 minutes. Well, let me check in. Kathy and Patty.
We're good. We knew this would
You knew this would happen. You planned for it, didn't you?
We did.
You did.
I'm sorry. Yes, we're available.
Do you have your snacks and your tea or your cup of wine or
We do. We're good. We're good.
Good. Okay. So this is a fun question. What have been your favorite CEUs, conferences, courses, books, etc. in the field? I could talk about this all night. So I will say I want everybody to fly out to Boston next spring. And I want you to come to the MEDA conference, MEDA. It stands for Multi-Service Eating Disorders Association. It is my professional home. I was a baby when I joined this organization. It is where I first got free clinical supervision. It is where I first gave my second talk at a national conference, where I gave my first keynote. It is a beautiful and unusual conference in the eating disorders space. And they host it every spring. And that's my very favorite, specifically my favorite eating disorders conference. But it's a warm and cozy for me because it's where I've grown up. And it's a really unique nonprofit organization. And I think the fact that it's a nonprofit keeps it a local nonprofit keeps it pretty special. I will also say what has been deeply impactful for me has actually been, and there is real value in attending straight eating disorders training, especially if you're brand new. I mean, for me, when I was brand new to the field, going live to the Run Fruit conference was really transformative. So that's another conference that for me over the years was really deeply impactful. Now we know we have a lot more options virtually and some really cool, unique things happening in the space, which is great, like the BIPOC Eating Disorders Conference. The other things that have been really meaningful to me in getting trained has been things that haven't been strictly eating disorders, but helped me. So there is annually a trauma conference that happens in Boston every year, but they also now hold it virtually. And it is phenomenal. And Patty, if you can make a note, I'll link to Meta and I'll link to this trauma conference. Also, I am in training for internal family systems. And so that has also more recently, that wasn't early on, but more recently been really, really, really impactful for me. In terms of courses, when I started out, and this is just honest to goodness speaking from my heart, when I started out, there weren't online courses. It's why I developed mine. I wanted there to be courses for nutrition professionals, and that's why I made mine. So, I mean, my training with Noreen Hunani, who's RDs for neurodiversity, has blown my mind, because as somebody who is neurotypical, and that is not my area of expertise, has vastly expanded my thinking and understanding. So that's been a pretty major one more recently for me. Books, I could go on and on and on about books. So what I'll do is I will share a couple of my sort of classic all-time favorites. One of my favorites that is not specific to eating disorders, but very applicable to working with eating disorders, is Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach. But what I will say is that she's really missing, when she gives examples around food, she totally misses it. Like, it's not a book that I just blanket recommend to clients, because she's not great with the food stuff. Another training that was so incredible for me is that again, in my neck of the woods in the Boston area, there was a group of psychologists who provided a certificate training program in gut-directed hypnotherapy. And that was really transformative for me. So that was another really cool training. But I could spend my lifetime, like, if I could find a rich person to just fund my ongoing like training and learning, I'd do that rather than practice clinically. That's not totally true. My clients are my best teachers, and I really do mean that from my heart. YIH. I'm so sorry, because I think I'm assuming I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but I love your question. Was there a time you felt inadequate in your counseling skills? And if you did, how did you manage that? Yes, even now. Yes, there have been times in the past and times in the present, including Monday. I called my colleague, true story, last week. So this is what I do at this point in my career. This is what I do when I feel inadequate. I have my people who are my safe people who I can call. So my very close colleagues, and then of course my supervisor. And so I called my colleague, who's the therapist of a shared client. And I said, I don't know, here's what happened in session. I don't know if I handled this the best way. I'm going to tell you what I said and what I did, and I would love your feedback. Now, we have the relationship that we have, that this is someone who I'm very comfortable with, and I could make that kind of an ask. So I spot check it with people that I trust at this juncture. I also get a ton of clinical supervision still, and I receive ongoing training in my counseling skills. So, yeah, there are going to be all kinds of times. And this is one of the things that I sort of put down and then deleted in like my top 3 of what I wished I'd known, is that often daily doing counseling work, you're going to feel uncomfortable and unsure so much of the time. And so you're developing the skills of getting comfortable with not getting it right or knowing if you've gotten it right, because it's, rather than MNT or calculating a tube feed where you can sort of follow a formula, you're going off of your training and your supervision and your skill development, and you're totally winging it. Early on, so this is something I laugh at with one of my closest, longest colleagues, fellow dietitian. She and I were super green. We started our in private practice at the same time, and we would get together for informal supervision and talk about how we felt like we didn't know what we were doing, and this is what we said, and what did you think about that? And this is what she said, and she'd ask me what I thought about that. And so I think it's in the relationships, I really do, so that you're not alone with it. Terry's asking, what are your thoughts on using treatment contracts? I don't use them. I could go on a big soapbox around that. Now, we are clear on the teams that I work on in terms of what our recommendations are, but I don't ever use a contract. And that isn't to say that if you are using contracts right now, that makes you wrong. I am a very, 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 very firm believer that there are many excellent ways to practice. I really do believe that. But I don't use treatment contracts because I find the majority of the time providers have a hard time holding to them. And I find that the things that are put on there are sometimes arbitrary. So I haven't found them useful. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to finish with this one. Another attendee asked, how long is this tonight? It was supposed to go 1 hour, 7:30 to 8:30 my time, Eastern Standard Time. It's 8:42. I'll wrap this up at 8:43. What are your preferred methods of staying educated on eating disorders and motivational interviewing? Books, podcasts, reading research. I do not turn to podcasts for staying educated because I find that most podcasts by design skim the surface and are not fully, but are often geared towards lay public rather than it's not like high level clinical training. I know you're saying sort of staying educated. So that's not an avenue for me. For me, staying educated is people who I really deeply respect in the field and who I want to learn from. If they have a newsletter or a Substack, I subscribe to it or I pay them for it. So for instance, Reagan Chastain, Substack, you better believe I pay for her Substack. Gloria Lucas, now going to Positivity Pride. I read every one of her newsletters. So I look to people who I respect, who have a lived experience and expertise that I don't, and I pay attention to what they're doing. Then some of you do that with me, which I am very humbled by. I am also if I attend a conference and someone cites research and I want to know more about it, I go to the research. So I do read a fair bit of research. And I also, because it's a genuine love for me, I read a ton. That's not possible for everybody. That's not preferred for everyone. There's not a right or a wrong. You can audiobook, you can, read books. But that's what I do. And how did you or do you deal with any feelings of imposter syndrome? I want to normalize imposter syndrome. I experience imposter syndrome. I was feeling like an imposter tonight. One of the things that I do is I get these ideas of things that I'm excited about and I launch it out. And then I'm like, what am I doing? One, I use self-compassion strategies of sort of appreciating the common humanity because I do not know a single phenomenal eating disorder dietitian who hasn't grappled with feelings of imposter syndrome. And so I think it is then identifying how much of this is sort of manageable levels of imposter syndrome versus when it's becoming paralyzing and when it's really getting in the way. And I think for some people, it's a place where they need to talk about it in therapy because sometimes it has kind of deeper roots. For me, and working through my own feelings of imposter syndrome, it has been in clinical supervision and in those trusted relationships that I was talking about, and in my own self-compassion practice of that when we lean into vulnerability or we take risks and we put ourselves out there, that we are really vulnerable and we often feel like an imposter. And so it's in that practice of intentional self-compassion practice as well. So there are so many good questions, and I hate that I can't answer them all. Somebody's asking, Kathy, and maybe you're seeing this, can you send a bullet point recap of all of this? Can we transcribe the audio?
Yes, we'll be doing that. And we were going to compile the questions and answers from that to send out as well.
Okay. So
you just didn't know about that yet.
We will send, hopefully you'll hear from us in under a week. And what you'll get is that realistic, Kathy?
Yeah, tomorrow we're going to send a link with the recording.
Yep.
Okay, an email with that. And we're also the plan was to take the questions and the answers and do a little recap of that to get everybody out there. I know there's lots of questions you haven't answered, so we might have to talk a little bit about how we could potentially do that. Look at some of them and maybe put some of them into the other parts of it. So, but you and I will have to talk about that and your bandwidth to go through those. Because there are several that haven't gotten answered. Some are similar, but we can do the best we can to try and get some answers out there, I think.
Sounds good. I'm just trying to scroll down to any just sort of practical questions before we sign off. Patty, I know, has done a wonderful job of, making note of the things that I said.
One, I think, Marci, that you could, a practical important one is, do you have to have supervision as an eating disorders dietitian?
So I'm going to answer letter of the law and then spirit of the law. Letter of the law, going biblical here. In an ideal world, I want every single clinician, regardless of license type, every single clinician who's working with eating disorders to have supervision. Because what it does is you will grow in your skillfulness and your competence and your joy if you have a good supervisor, right? Leaps and bounds. And it helps with burnout. And it helps, it's like all of the good of being in the field becomes amplified. So it's not just so that you provide really good client care. I mean, it's absolutely for that. Supervision is for the protection of the client, but it's also for the protection of the clinician, because doing eating disorders work is so complicated and it's so hard. And we're working with a lot of different diagnoses, and it's just not anything that we're adequately trained for in our sort of baseline training. So in my dream of dreams, if I'm not worried about money and access and resources and all of that, I would say yes. It has been the saving grace to my entire career, truly, is clinical supervision. I would not be here. This is sort of looping back to Taylor's question from the start. If I didn't have clinical supervision, I guarantee you I would not be here. Now, do I have tremendous empathy and room for nuance in terms of not everybody's going to have the experiences that I've had with clinical supervision? Accessing supervision can feel difficult in terms of cost, in terms of getting to a supervisor that you feel aligned with. Yes, because in dietetics, supervision is not part of how we're trained, where it's baked in for therapy. And so we're so far behind as a field. Like, we don't even have like best practice guidelines for clinical supervision in dietetics. So yay. Oh, Joyce, you're so welcome. Yes. Thank you. Oh, she's saying that this was helpful. I'm so glad. I'm just going to finish up getting a little bit gushy, and I'm going to speak from my heart from those of you who are hanging with me till the very end, is that I want our community to feel like a place where you belong and you're wanted and you're needed, and you have the support to do really good work. And if you have feedback for me, if you have suggestions for me, if you have ideas for me in terms of how we foster a community where we have one another's backs, where we support each other, where the value of being an eating disorder dietitian is felt, and we sort of have the strength of our community. So you're all needed, every single one of you. Like Kathy said, you truly have something that makes you unique in what you offer. And so it isn't about competition. It isn't about one-upping one another. And I really believe that from my heart. And I'm so glad you're here. And I'm really open to anything that you want to share with me in response to anything that I've said here tonight. And I'm so glad. We need a community. We need it. And I'm really hopeful that this has been helpful for each of you in some way. And whatever time zone this is finding you in, some of you it's your morning. If you're joining from across the globe, some of you like me are going to be headed to bed soon. And I'm glad you're here. And my ears and my inbox will be open. So we'll be in touch and we'll follow up with the resources. And I hope you have a really good night or rest of your day.